On a chilly autumn evening in New York City, the air was buzzing with excitement. The annual Women of Influence Gala had brought together some of the most talked-about figures from across industries: politicians, celebrities, activists, and business leaders. Everyone dressed to impress, walking into the grand ballroom like they owned it. Cameras flashed non-stop as reporters tried to catch every word, every smile, and every awkward glance between high-profile guests. Among the crowd were two women who couldn't be more different, but still managed to draw everyone's attention. One was a former First Lady known for her glamorous style and quiet demeanor. Her name? Melania Trump. She wasn't officially part of politics anymore, but she still carried that aura of mystery and intrigue wherever she went. People either loved her or didn't quite know what to make of her. Either way, all eyes were on her when she entered the room. The other woman was Jasmine Crockett, a rising star in Congress. Unlike Melania, Jasmine was anything but quiet. She came straight out of Texas, bringing her bold personality and unapologetic honesty to Washington. She fought hard for people who often felt left behind, those struggling with poverty, discrimination, or injustice. If you've ever seen someone stand up fearlessly in front of a microphone and call out unfairness without holding back, then you'd understand why Jasmine had earned herself a reputation as someone not to mess with. That night, both women were there for different reasons. Melania had been invited to give a short speech, probably because organizers thought having a former First Lady would add prestige to the event. Jasmine, on the other hand, was set to receive an award for her work, advocating for marginalized communities. It was clear these two weren't exactly cut from the same cloth. One represented old-school elegance, while the other embodied raw passion and determination. As the evening rolled on, the energy in the room grew thicker. A live TV crew was broadcasting parts of the gala, including interviews with key attendees. At one point, the host decided to bring Melania and Jasmine together for a quick segment. They sat side by side under bright studio lights, their body language telling its own story. Melania looked calm, almost detached, wearing a sleek white suit that screamed sophistication. Jasmine, meanwhile, leaned forward slightly in her chair, ready to dive into whatever topic came her way. The conversation started off innocently enough. The host asked Melania how she felt about being back in the public eye after stepping away from the White House. She gave vague answers, talking about focusing on family and personal projects. Then the host turned the spotlight onto Jasmine, praising her recent legislative victories and asking what inspired her to fight so fiercely for change. But things took a turn when the host posed a seemingly harmless question. "What do you think about rising female leaders today, Mrs. Trump?" Melania paused for a moment, tilting her head slightly as if considering her response carefully. Then, with a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, she said, "I believe it's important for women to carry themselves with grace and elegance, not just loud voices." You could hear a pin drop in the room. While Melania may have intended her comment to sound neutral, everyone knew it wasn't just a random observation. Her gaze flickered toward Jasmine for a split second, and that was all the confirmation viewers needed. This wasn't just about women in general. It was a direct dig at Jasmine's outspoken nature. Social media erupted instantly. Viewers watching live immediately picked up on the tension. Some defended Melania, saying she was simply emphasizing poise and class. Others slammed her, accusing her of trying to silence strong women who refused to play by outdated rules. Hashtags started trending within minutes, dissecting every word, every facial expression, every nuance of the interaction. Jasmine, however, didn't react right away. She kept her composure, sitting tall in her chair with a slight smirk playing on her lips. There was no anger, no visible frustration, just a calm intensity that hinted something big was coming. The host, sensing the brewing drama, hesitated before turning to Jasmine. "Congresswoman," he said cautiously, "how would you respond to Mrs. Trump's comments?" And just like that, the entire nation leaned in closer, waiting to see what Jasmine would say next. The room was electric, buzzing with anticipation as all eyes turned to Jasmine. The host's question hung in the air like a challenge waiting to be met. Everyone knew this wasn't just another polite exchange. It was a moment that could either fizzle out or explode into something unforgettable. And if there was one thing Jasmine was known for, it was her ability to turn moments like these into history. Jasmine didn't rush. She took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make everyone lean in closer. Her fingers brushed against the armrest of her chair, a subtle gesture that showed she was calm but ready. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and clear, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Well," she began, her tone measured but firm, "if grace and elegance mean ignoring the struggles of everyday people, then I'll happily take my loud voice over silence any day." The crowd stirred, some nodding in agreement while others exchanged surprised glances. But Jasmine wasn't done yet. She leaned forward slightly, making sure the camera caught every ounce of her conviction. Her next words landed like a punch. "Mrs. Trump, your time in the White House gave you a platform, but platforms are meant to lift others up, not stand above them. My loud voice has helped pass legislation, fight for justice, and give hope to those who feel invisible. So forgive me if I don't aspire to your definition of grace. I'm too busy trying to make history." The room erupted. People clapped, cheered, and even whistled. Some stood up, unable to contain their excitement. It wasn't just the power of her words. It was the way she delivered them, with authenticity, confidence, and a touch of sass that made it impossible not to admire her. Even seasoned journalists watching from behind their cameras couldn't help but smile. They'd seen plenty of live TV moments, but this felt different. It felt real. Melania, on the other hand, looked stunned. For someone usually so composed, her discomfort was evident. Her lips pressed together in a tight smile, and she shifted awkwardly in her seat. Whether she expected Jasmine to back down, or simply hadn't anticipated such a sharp response, it was clear she hadn't planned for this kind of comeback. The contrast between the two women couldn't have been starker, one radiating quiet unease, the other glowing with unshakable strength. As the applause died down, the host quickly tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground. He asked generic questions about their respective careers and future plans, but no one cared anymore. The damage, or rather the impact, had already been done. Viewers at home were glued to their screens, replaying clips of Jasmine's response over and over again. Social media lit up like fireworks on New Year's Eve. People tweeted, posted, and shared their thoughts nonstop, dissecting every second of the exchange. Some praised Jasmine for standing her ground, calling her a role model for women everywhere. Others criticized Melania for what they saw as elitism, accusing her of looking down on anyone who didn't fit her polished image. Still, there were defenders of Melania too, arguing that she had simply expressed her personal values. But regardless of where people stood, one thing was undeniable. The clash had struck a chord. For many, it wasn't just about the two women involved. It was about something bigger, a reflection of the ongoing debate over what leadership should look like, especially for women. Should leaders prioritize poise and perfection? Or is it okay, maybe even necessary, to be bold, imperfect, and unapologetically human? That night, Jasmine made it clear where she stood. She wasn't interested in fitting into someone else's mold. She wanted to break it. Backstage after the event, reporters swarmed Jasmine, eager to get her take on what had just happened. But instead of gloating or throwing more shade, she kept things classy. "Look," she said, addressing the small crowd gathered around her, "I respect anyone who uses their voice to speak up for what they believe in. But we also need to remember that our voices can do more than sound nice. They can create change. And that's what I'm here to do." Her humility only added to the admiration people felt for her. Here was a woman who hadn't just won a verbal sparring match. She'd used it as an opportunity to remind everyone of the bigger picture. It wasn't about tearing someone else down. It was about lifting others up. Meanwhile, Melania disappeared from the spotlight almost immediately after the segment ended. She attended a few more formalities at the gala but avoided further interviews. Later, sources close to her revealed that she found the entire situation uncomfortable. Whether she regretted her initial comment or simply wished it hadn't blown, Up the way it did, no one could say for sure. What was clear, though, was that she hadn't expected Jasmine to respond the way she did. By the time the gala wrapped up, the story had already taken on a life of its own. News outlets played the clip repeatedly, framing it as one of the most memorable moments of the year. Talk shows debated it, late-night hosts joked about it, and even casual viewers couldn't stop talking about it. It was the kind of moment that transcended politics, becoming a cultural touchstone that people would reference for years to come. And through it all, Jasmine remained unfazed. She didn't gloat or seek revenge. Instead, she focused on what mattered most to her, using her platform to continue fighting for justice. Because for her, the real victory wasn't winning an argument. It was inspiring others to find their own voices and use them fearlessly. The morning after the gala, it felt like the entire world was talking about what had happened. Social media timelines were flooded with reactions, memes, and endless discussions. Clips of Jasmine's response played on repeat across news channels, turning her words into a rallying cry for anyone who'd ever been told to tone themselves down. People weren't just sharing the video, they were living it, quoting it, and making it their own. For Jasmine, waking up to the whirlwind of attention was surreal. Her phone buzzed nonstop with notifications from friends, family, colleagues, and even strangers thanking her for standing up and speaking out. Some messages were heartfelt, saying things like, "You gave me courage to keep going." Others were playful, tagging her in memes captioned with lines like, "Loud voices get stuff done." It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. She knew this moment wasn't just about her anymore. It had become something bigger, a symbol of resilience, authenticity, and the power of using your voice unapologetically. Instead of shying away from the spotlight, Jasmine embraced it. She saw an opportunity to amplify the issues she cared about and bring more attention to the causes that mattered most to her. That same day, she appeared on several talk shows and podcasts, fielding questions about the now infamous exchange. Hosts wanted to know how she stayed so composed under pressure and whether she planned to address Melania directly again. But Jasmine kept her answers focused on the bigger picture. "This isn't about me versus anyone," she said during one interview. "It's about reminding people that our voices have value, especially when they're used to fight for justice and equality." Her approach struck a chord with audiences. Even people who hadn't paid much attention to politics before found themselves drawn to her message. They admired her confidence without arrogance, her wit without cruelty. She didn't come off as someone seeking fame or glory. She came off as someone genuinely committed to making the world a better place. Meanwhile, the fallout from Melania was quieter but equally significant. In the days following the gala, she largely retreated from public view. There were no angry tweets or defensive statements, just silence. Behind the scenes, though, sources close to her revealed that she was frustrated. The confrontation had clearly rattled her, not because of Jasmine's words themselves, but because of how quickly the narrative spiraled out of her control. Some of Melania's supporters defended her, arguing that her comment about grace and elegance had been misinterpreted. They insisted she wasn't trying to insult anyone but was simply expressing her personal beliefs. Others, however, criticized her for failing to recognize the diversity of leadership styles. "Not everyone can or should lead the same way," one commentator wrote. "Sometimes being loud is exactly what we need." As the debate raged on, it became clear that the clash between the two women had tapped into something deeper. It wasn't just about them. It was about the broader conversation around gender power and representation. For years, women in leadership positions had faced impossible expectations. Be strong but not too aggressive, confident but not arrogant, ambitious but not selfish. Jasmine's response flipped that script, showing that sometimes breaking the rules is the only way to change the game. Back in Washington, Jasmine wasted no time capitalizing on the momentum. She announced plans to introduce new legislation aimed at addressing systemic inequities in education, healthcare, and criminal justice. Dubbed the Loud Voices Act, the bill sought to empower marginalized communities by giving them a seat at the table where decisions were made. Its name was a deliberate nod to her viral moment. serving as both a reminder of her clapback and a call to action for future generations. The act quickly gained traction, earning endorsements from advocacy groups, celebrities, and fellow lawmakers. Supporters praised its boldness and vision, calling it a game-changer for underserved communities. Critics dismissed it as overly ambitious, warning that it might face resistance in Congress. But Jasmine didn't care. She knew change rarely came easy, and if she had to fight tooth and nail to make progress, so be it. Amid the chaos, there was also a surprising twist. A few weeks after the gala, Melania reached out to Jasmine privately via email. The contents of their exchange remain unknown, but insiders hinted that it was cordial and focused on finding common ground. Whether it was a genuine attempt at reconciliation or a calculated PR move, no one could say for sure. What mattered was that both women recognized the significance of their encounter, not just for themselves, but for the countless others watching and learning from it. By the end of the month, the dust had settled somewhat, but the ripple effects continued to spread. Schools incorporated Jasmine's story into lesson plans, teaching students about the importance of standing up for their beliefs. Women's organizations hosted panels and workshops inspired by her example, encouraging participants to embrace their unique strengths rather than conform to societal norms. Even fashion magazines featured articles celebrating her boldness, proving that style and substance could coexist. Through it all, Jasmine remained grounded. She didn't let the sudden fame go to her head or distract her from her mission. If anything, it fueled her determination to keep pushing forward. Every speech she gave, every meeting she attended, every late night spent drafting policy proposals was driven by the same goal: to leave the world better than she found it. And while the spotlight eventually shifted to other stories and scandals, the impact of that single moment lingered. It reminded people that history isn't always made by grand gestures or sweeping declarations. Sometimes it's made by ordinary individuals doing extraordinary things. One loud, fearless voice at a time. The weeks following the gala were a whirlwind for Jasmine. Her life already busy became a blur of interviews, public appearances, and late-night strategy sessions. She was everywhere. On morning talk shows sipping coffee with hosts, on Capitol Hill leading passionate discussions about policy reform, and even at community centers listening to everyday people share their struggles. It wasn't just her schedule that had changed, it was her influence. People who had never heard of her before were now hanging on to her every word. At first, some critics tried to paint her as someone riding the wave of a single viral moment. They said she was all talk and no action, accusing her of using the confrontation with Melania to boost her profile. But Jasmine didn't waste time defending herself against those claims. Instead, she let her work speak for itself. Every speech she gave, every bill she introduced, and every community event she attended reinforced the fact that this wasn't about fame. It was about making real change. One of the most memorable moments came during a town hall meeting in a small town outside Washington, D.C. The room was packed with locals eager to hear what their representative had to say. A young woman stood up, clutching a microphone tightly, and asked, "What do you think makes someone a true leader?" Jasmine paused for a moment, thinking carefully before responding. "A true leader," she said, "isn't afraid to listen, to really listen, to the people they're supposed to serve. Leadership isn't about having all the answers or looking perfect while you figure things out. It's about showing up, rolling up your sleeves, and doing the hard work, even when no one is watching." The crowd erupted into applause, but what struck everyone there wasn't just her words, it was the sincerity behind them. You could tell she meant every syllable. That authenticity resonated with people, whether they agreed with her politics or not. It reminded them that leadership wasn't about fitting into a mold. It was about breaking barriers and creating space for others to step forward. While Jasmine was busy building bridges and pushing for progress, Melania seemed to retreat further from the spotlight. She made a few appearances at charity events and art exhibitions, always dressed impeccably and carrying herself with the same quiet grace she'd become known for. But her interactions with the press were minimal, and she avoided commenting publicly on the viral moment that had dominated headlines. Behind the scenes, though, Sources close to her revealed that she hadn't forgotten about the incident. Some claimed she felt misunderstood, insisting her comment about grace and elegance had been taken out of context. Others suggested she regretted underestimating Jasmine, acknowledging that the Congresswoman's response had caught her off guard. Whatever her feelings, one thing was clear: the exchange had left its mark on her. In an unexpected twist, Melania reached out to Jasmine privately again. This time, the conversation went beyond pleasantries. According to insiders, they discussed the importance of empowering women and finding ways to support each other despite their differences. While the details remained confidential, the gesture signaled a willingness to move past the tension, at least on a personal level. For Jasmine, the outreach was meaningful but not surprising. She had always believed in the power of dialogue, even with people who didn't see eye to eye with her. "We don't have to agree on everything to make progress," she later told a reporter. "Sometimes the hardest conversations are the ones that lead to the most growth." As the months passed, the initial frenzy around the confrontation began to fade, replaced by quieter but equally important developments. Jasmine continued championing causes close to her heart, from criminal justice reform to education equity. Her Loud Voices Act gained traction, earning bipartisan support and sparking conversations about how to create systems that truly served everyone, not just those with privilege and power. Meanwhile, Melania gradually returned to the public, focusing on initiatives related to children's welfare and the arts. Though her approach remained understated, there was a noticeable shift in her messaging. She started emphasizing the importance of diverse perspectives and collaboration, themes that aligned with the broader cultural shifts sparked by the gala incident. The media couldn't help but draw parallels between the two women's paths. Where once they seemed worlds apart, their trajectories now hinted at a shared understanding of the complexities of modern leadership. Neither woman fit neatly into traditional categories. One represented poise and polish, the other boldness and grit. But together they highlighted the spectrum of strength and resilience that women bring to the table. Back in Congress, Jasmine faced challenges, as anyone in her position would. Not every proposal she introduced sailed through smoothly, and not every speech she gave earned standing ovations. There were tough days filled with setbacks and frustrations. But through it all, she stayed grounded, leaning on the lessons she'd learned along the way. That progress takes time, that every voice matters, and that staying true to yourself is the most powerful weapon you can wield. Her team often joked that she worked harder after the gala than she ever had before. Late nights became routine, and weekends disappeared into a haze of meetings and phone calls. But Jasmine didn't mind. She thrived on the chaos, knowing that each step brought her closer to the change she envisioned. By the end of the year, the impact of that single moment at the gala was undeniable. It had sparked debates, inspired movements, and challenged long-held assumptions about what it means to be a leader. For Jasmine, it was proof that speaking your truth, even when it feels risky, can ripple outward in ways you might never expect. And for Melania, it was a reminder that sometimes the most profound lessons come from the unlikeliest places. Their encounter may have started as a clash, but it ended as something far greater, a catalyst for reflection, growth, and unity. Months had passed since the gala, and life for both women had settled into a new rhythm. For Jasmine, the whirlwind of attention had transformed into a steady stream of opportunities to create meaningful change. She wasn't just riding a wave anymore. She was steering it. Her days were packed with meetings, speeches, and grassroots efforts to connect with people who needed her voice the most. Every step she took felt like a brick being laid in the foundation of something bigger, something that would outlast headlines and hashtags. One of the most impactful moments came when she returned to her hometown. It wasn't glamorous or glitzy, like the events in New York City, but it was deeply personal. She visited schools, community centers, and local businesses, sitting down with folks who rarely got a chance to share their stories on a national stage. In one particularly moving moment, she sat at a folding table in a small church basement, surrounded by women who worked multiple jobs just to make ends meet. They spoke openly about their struggles, paying rent, affording childcare, balancing, Dreams with Survival. Jasmine listened intently, nodding along as they poured out their hearts. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't deliver a rehearsed speech or throw around big political buzzwords. Instead, she leaned forward, her elbows resting on the table, and said, "You all are the reason I do this work. Your voices matter more than mine ever could. My job isn't to save you, it's to clear the road so you can walk it yourselves." The room erupted in applause, not because she said anything flashy, but because she made them feel seen. That was Jasmine's superpower, making people believe they mattered even when the world tried to tell them otherwise. Meanwhile, Melania had found her own way of navigating the aftermath. After months of staying largely out of the spotlight, she began to re-emerge, focusing on causes close to her heart. She hosted art exhibits for underprivileged children, emphasizing creativity as a tool for healing and growth. She also launched an initiative aimed at promoting kindness and empathy in schools, encouraging kids to lift each other up instead of tearing each other down. Her approach was quieter than Jasmine's, but it resonated in its own way. While some critics dismissed her efforts as surface level, others saw sincerity in her actions. At a charity gala in Miami, she gave a brief speech that hinted at a shift in perspective. "We live in a world where differences often divide us," she said, her voice soft but steady. "But maybe it's time we focus less on what sets us apart and more on what brings us together." The audience responded warmly, giving her a standing ovation. Whether it was genuine admiration or polite applause, no one could deny that Melania was trying to carve out a new role for herself, one that went beyond the shadow of her past. Despite their vastly different approaches, the two women remained connected by the shared moment that had changed everything. Though they hadn't crossed paths again publicly, whispers of their private conversations continued to circulate. Some speculated that their exchanges had inspired both of them to rethink their definitions of leadership and influence. Others dismissed it as wishful thinking, arguing that their worlds were simply too different to overlap meaningfully. But one thing was undeniable: the ripple effects of their encounter kept spreading. Women across the country began having conversations about what it meant to lead authentically. Schools incorporated discussions about grace versus grit into their curriculums, asking students to reflect on how they wanted to show up in the world. Even workplaces started hosting workshops on embracing diverse leadership styles, recognizing that there wasn't just one right way to succeed. For Jasmine, this cultural shift validated everything she stood for. She knew the fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but seeing people embrace the idea of using their unique voices gave her hope. During a panel discussion at a women's summit, she summed it up perfectly. "Change doesn't happen overnight, and it certainly doesn't happen alone. It happens when we stop waiting for permission and start showing up as our full selves. Loud or quiet, bold or gentle, we all have a role to play." Her words struck a chord, earning yet another round of applause. But the real magic happened afterward, when attendees approached her to share their own stories. A young woman told her about starting a nonprofit to help girls access STEM education. Another explained how she'd been inspired to run for local office despite doubting herself at first. Each story reinforced the idea that leadership wasn't about titles or platforms. It was about action and impact. As the year drew to a close, Jasmine reflected on how much had changed, not just for her, but for the movement she represented. She wasn't naive enough to think one viral moment could fix centuries of inequality, but she believed it could spark something unstoppable. And judging by the growing number of women stepping into positions of power and refusing to dim their light, she might have been onto something. Melania, too, seemed to find a sense of peace in her journey. While she may never have pursued politics in the same way Jasmine did, she discovered a different kind of fulfillment in her philanthropic work. By championing causes that aligned with her values, she carved out a legacy that felt uniquely hers. Critics still debated her motives, but supporters praised her for using her platform to spread positivity. In the end, their paths diverged, but their shared moment continued to shape the conversation. It reminded everyone watching that leadership comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most powerful connections happen when we least expect them. The clash that once divided them ultimately became a bridge, proving that even the fiercest disagreements can lead to growth if approached with openness and understanding. Months turned into a year, and the world kept spinning, but the impact of that unforgettable night at the gala continued to echo. For Jasmine, it wasn't just about what had happened in that moment. It was about how she chose to carry its legacy forward. She didn't slow down, not for a second. If anything, her determination grew stronger with each passing day. Her Loud Voices Act became more than just a piece of legislation. It evolved into a movement. People started using the phrase loud voices everywhere, in classrooms, boardrooms, and even living rooms, to remind themselves and others that speaking up is powerful. One of the most remarkable things about Jasmine's journey was how she stayed connected to the people she served. She didn't let fame or success distance her from the communities that mattered most. Instead, she leaned in harder. On weekends, she'd visit neighborhoods far removed from the polished halls of Congress. She'd sit on porches, share meals, and listen to stories that often went unheard. These moments weren't just about gathering information, they were about building trust. At one such gathering, an elderly woman stood up during a community meeting and said, "You know, we've been waiting for someone like you for a long time, someone who listens, who fights, who doesn't give up." The room erupted in applause, and Jasmine smiled, though her eyes glistened with emotion. "I'm here because of you," she replied softly, "because you showed me what courage looks like." Her efforts paid off in ways big and small. The Loud Voices Act gained widespread support, eventually passing through Congress with bipartisan backing. It wasn't perfect, no law ever is, but it represented progress. It created new opportunities for marginalized groups to have a say in policy decisions, ensuring their voices were heard where it mattered most. When the president signed it into law, Jasmine stood beside him, holding back tears as cameras flashed around her. This wasn't just a victory for her. It was a victory for everyone who believed in fairness and justice. Meanwhile, Melania's path took a quieter but equally meaningful turn. Her focus shifted toward nurturing creativity and kindness. Two values she held dear. She traveled to schools across the country, reading books to children and encouraging them to dream big. At one elementary school in Ohio, she handed out art supplies to a group of wide-eyed kids, telling them, "Your imagination has no limits. Use it to make the world brighter." Her work may not have grabbed headlines the way Jasmine's did, but it touched lives in profound ways. Teachers reported seeing students inspired to express themselves through art and writing. Parents thanked her for reminding their children that being kind was just as important as being smart. Slowly but surely, Melania began carving out a role that felt authentic to her, one that allowed her to contribute without stepping back into the political spotlight. Though their paths rarely crossed publicly, the ripple effects of their shared moment continued to shape the cultural landscape. Women everywhere were redefining what leadership looked like. Some embraced boldness, unafraid to challenge the status quo. Others championed quiet strength, proving that influence didn't always come with noise. Both approaches were celebrated, showing that there was room for everyone at the table. In interviews, Jasmine often reflected on the importance of unity despite differences. "We don't have to agree on everything to move forward," she'd say. "What matters is that we're all working toward a better future. Whether you're loud or soft-spoken, whether you lead with your head or your heart, every effort counts." Her words resonated deeply, especially among young women entering politics, activism, and other fields traditionally dominated by men. Colleges invited her to speak at graduation ceremonies, where she urged graduates to embrace their unique strengths. "Don't try to fit someone else's mold," she told them. "Be unapologetically you, that's where your power lies." Melania, too, found her voice in unexpected ways. During a charity event in New York, she gave a heartfelt speech about the importance of empathy. "We live in a fast-paced world," she said, her tone warm and sincere. "But sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is slow down and truly see each other." Her message struck a chord, earning praise from unlikely corners. Critics who once dismissed her as out of touch now acknowledged her ability to inspire compassion. By the end of the year, both women had cemented their places in history, not as rivals but as symbols of resilience and growth. Their encounter at the gala had sparked something neither could have predicted, a nationwide conversation about authenticity, representation, and the many forms of strength. It reminded people that leadership isn't a one-size-fits-all concept. Some leaders shine brightly, lighting the way for others to follow. Others glow softly, offering comfort and stability in turbulent times. Both are necessary. Both are valuable. As Jasmine prepared for another busy year ahead, she paused to reflect on how far she'd come. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would still be battles to fight, obstacles to overcome, and skeptics to silence. But she also knew she wasn't alone. Millions of people stood beside her, ready to lift their voices alongside hers. For Melania, the journey was quieter, but no less fulfilling. She continued championing causes close to her heart, finding joy in the small victories along the way. Together, these two women, so different yet connected by a single moment, proved that change often begins with a spark. And sometimes that spark comes from the most unlikely places. History would remember them not just for the confrontation that brought them together, but for the legacies they built afterward. They taught us that leadership isn't about perfection, it's about purpose. It's about showing up, staying true, and using whatever gifts you have to make the world a little better than you found it. And so, the story came full circle, not with bitterness or resentment, but with hope. Because in the end, it wasn't about who won or lost. It was about the countless lives touched, the barriers broken, and the doors opened for future generations. Loud voices and quiet hearts, they both have the power to change the world.